The first time I felt financially dangerous, I was not rich. I was not on television. I was not buying companies for sport. I was not moving billions around a balance sheet. I was not standing on some mountain of passive income while the world used words like legendary, iconic, or billionaire. I was just sitting on $100,000 in cash. And that may be one of the most misunderstood milestones in the whole wealth conversation. People hear $100,000 now, and many of them shrug. They compare it to the internet's favorite fantasies. They compare it to exits, to viral entrepreneurs, to giant houses, to screenshots, to monthly revenue claims, to absurd highlight reels. They compare it to the most theatrical examples they can find and conclude that 100,000 is small. That is the vocabulary of people who have never been poor enough, scared enough, or pressed enough to 100,000 actually buys a person. It buys breathing room, it buys time, it buys the end of daily panic. It buys the ability to think one season ahead instead of one bill ahead. And until you reach that point, most of your talk about ambition is still being filtered through survival. That is the line I want you to understand from the beginning. Your first $100,000 is not a flex. It is your first real runway. That is the mother line for this whole story. Not your first trophy, your first runway. I have always believed that people fail in finance for a very ordinary reason. They try to build a future while tomorrow still has a knife at their throat. They say they want to start a business, learn a skill, change their trajectory, take risk, become free, build wealth, think long term, create something meaningful, wonderful. But at the same time, they are doing math on rent, groceries, insurance, debt, and whether one bad week will pull the floor out from under them. No one does his best thinking with the rent standing over his shoulder. No one builds aggressively with the grocery bill whispering in his ear. No one makes clean strategic decisions while his life is one bounce payment away from chaos. That is why I respect $100,000 so much. It is not because the number is magical. It is because the number changes the psychology of the operator. Most people think money matters because of what it buys outside of you. I think money matters first because of what it removes inside of you. The noise, the panic, the bargaining with every tiny expense, the constant background fear that makes all ambition smaller than it should be. That is why the first rule is simple. Your first $100,000 is not about luxury. It is about removing survival from the driver's seat. The source document you gave me understands this instinctively. It opens in exactly the right emotional place. Not with bragging, but with relief. Not with net worth theater, but with the first time tomorrow stopped feeling like an emergency. That is the emotional truth under the whole piece. And it is the part most people miss when they turn the conversation into a macho internet challenge. The first 100,000 is not important because it proves you are rich. It is important because it proves you are no longer helpless. Fay file a site, Fay turn 46 file 0 Fay. Now, if you want to reach that point in the real world, not in the motivational version of the world, you need to understand something very hard. You do not get your first runway by acting richer. You get it by acting more compressive than everybody around you. Most people try to earn their way to security while protecting every comfort that is making them insecure. That is impossible. If your goal is the first 100,000, the first stage is not glamorous. It is compression. I call it compression because austerity sounds like punishment and minimalism sounds like branding. Compression is cleaner. Compression means taking the life you currently have and squeezing waste, vanity, and softness out of it until cash begins appearing where it used to disappear. This is where weak people quit the conversation because compression offends the ego. No eating out because you deserve it. No pretending the overpriced apartment is an expression of identity. No worshiping the finance car because it helps you feel established. No acting as if better clothing, better furniture, better gadgets, and better little upgrades are somehow neutral while you are still financially fragile. The source material is intentionally ruthless on this point. Cut food costs, cut shelter costs, cut transportation costs, reuse things, share space, end consumption that flatters you but does not move you. That tone is not too harsh. It is the correct tone for the stage. You do not build runway by feeding every appetite that asks for tribute. You build runway by starving everything. That is not helping you escape. Fay file site, Fay turn 46, file 0 Fay. That is the second rule. Before you can take bigger risks, you must first make your current life cheaper to carry. This matters for a reason deeper than money. Compression does not only free cash, it frees courage. If your monthly burn is low enough, the world stops having so much leverage over you. A bad boss loses some power. A weak month hurts less. A side business gets more time to breathe. A new skill gets more room to compound before it must pay rent. You become harder to bully because your life requires less tribute. That is why the wealthy often look calm. It is not always because they are wiser. Sometimes it is simply because they require less of the current month to survive. And that is exactly what early builders need. This is the first mechanism. I call it the burn rate collapse. The burn rate collapse is the deliberate reduction of your monthly cost structure so severe that your dependence on the next paycheck begins shrinking, which in turn raises your ability to take intelligent risks. Notice what I said. Intelligent risks, not theatrical risks. The internet has romanticized recklessness and called it entrepreneurship. I have no use for that. Walking off a cliff is not bravery. Quitting too soon is not freedom. Burning the bridge behind you before you built an alternative income engine is not courage. It is usually vanity combined with impatience. The first 100,000 is built by people who understand sequencing. First reduce the burn, then free cash, then free time, then learn, then attempt, then scale, then refuse lifestyle expansion. That is the right order. Everything else is theater. Now let us go to the second stage, because this is where the source document is stronger than most similar content. Most people think their job is the reason they are not free. For most ordinary people, that is nonsense. Their job is not killing the dream. Their waste is killing the dream. Their distraction is killing the dream. Their inability to use the hours outside the job is killing the dream. The source puts this in a very practical frame. Your 9 to 5 is not the executioner. The dead zones before and after it are the real crime scene. The 4 hours before, the 4 hours after, the lost chunks inside a day that disappear into scrolling drifting. Numbing, decompressing, grazing, talking, fantasizing, and making no usable move at all. Fay Philosite, Fay Turn 46, File 0 Fay that is uncomfortable. Good. Anything true enough to change your life will usually be uncomfortable before it becomes useful. I call this the hidden shift. The hidden shift is the block of hours in a normal day that does not belong to the employer, but still does not get reclaimed by the future. Most people bleed their future inside the hidden shift. They tell themselves they have no time, because that sentence feels innocent. Usually the truer sentence is more painful. They have time. They do not yet have command. That is different. When I was younger, I learned a lesson that never left me. The first hours of the day are disproportionately valuable because they arrive before the world has touched you too much. Before the phone, before the noise, before the little obligations begin nibbling your attention to death. If you can own those hours, really own them, you can build almost anything over time. The source says this directly in its own language. The morning block and the evening block are the battlefield. That is right, but I want to sharpen it further. The first independent hours of your day are not leisure. They are equity. If you spend them carelessly, you are selling future ownership for temporary sedation. If you spend them well, you are buying a new life before your old life wakes up. Fay Philosite, Fay Turn 46, File 0 Fay. That is the third rule. The hidden shift is where poor ambition becomes rich ambition. Now, once you have collapsed the burn rate and reclaimed time, most people make the next mistake. They scatter. They become open loops with a pulse. They hear skill, business content, agency, marketing, sales, copy editing, design, outreach, automation, offers, funnels, communities, real estate, crypto, Amazon, AI, and everything else. And because all of it sounds possible, none of it becomes real. This is why almost everyone who starts stays small. They mistake exposure for direction. The source handles this problem with a very clean principle. Find something people already pay for. Choose one offer, one customer, one channel, and stay there until the thing becomes real. That is not flashy advice, it is excellent advice. The fastest way to stay poor is to keep needing originality before you have earned competence. The fastest way to get paid is to solve a problem that people are already paying to solve. Fay Philosite, Fay Turn 46, File 0 Fay. This is the second mechanism. I call it demand anchoring. Demand anchoring is the decision to begin your wealth. Building skill journey inside markets where demand already exists, instead of gambling your early years on the hope that people might someday want what you are inventing. That one decision alone can save years, because once you begin inside demand, you are no longer wandering philosophically through opportunity. You are standing inside existing cash flow and asking what slice of it you can earn. That is a far more adult posture. Now, the source gives several examples by implication. Businesses always need attention, promotion, sales, systems, delivery, support, content, follow-up, and execution. Consumers always spend on recurring pain relief. The genius is not in discovering the category. The genius is in committing to one lane hard enough that your repetitions become meaningful. Fay file a site, Fay turn 46, file 0 Fay. This is where we need to talk about learning, because people misunderstand it almost as badly as they misunderstand entrepreneurship. Learning is not consumption. Learning is not listening. Learning is not nodding. Learning is not watching a charismatic person explain something while you enjoy the emotional sensation of becoming the kind of person who knows it. That is entertainment with better branding. The source says something I strongly agree with. If the condition is the same and the behavior does not change, you did not learn. That is brutally useful. Same room, same laptop, same calls, same output, same results, same behavior. Then all your learning was ornamental. Fay file a site, Fay turn 46. File 0 Fay. I call this the behavior test. The behavior test is the only honest standard for whether information has become skill. If the information does not change what you do under the same conditions, it has not yet become economically useful. This is why I prefer repetition to inspiration. People want the one insight that changes everything. I prefer 100 awkward repetitions that change one thing permanently. The source frames skill, building through feedback loops, top 10 person analysis, and repeated attempts. That is exactly right. Real learning is an iterative war. Volume, feedback, comparison. Correction. More attempts, more failure, more discrimination between what works and what feels good, then more volume. Fay file site, Fay turn 46, file 0 Fay. That is how a sales call gets better. That is how content improves. That is how copy sharpens. That is how offers harden. That is how service delivery becomes remarkable. Not because you know more, because you became different under repetition. This is the fourth rule. The market does not pay you for how inspired you felt while learning. It pays you for how different your output becomes after repetition. Now, let us talk about money allocation, because this is where builders sabotage themselves in both directions. Some people refuse to spend anything. They worship frugality to the point that they cripple speed. Other people spend emotionally on every tool, course, guru, event, software, and shiny object that promises acceleration. Both are forms of weakness. The source gives a better split. Spend on tools, spend on implementation help, spend on attempts. That is a very mature framework. Tools reduce friction. Implementation help compresses learning time. Attempts buy real data. Those are the right categories. What matters is not spending nothing. What matters is spending in ways that increase your ability to execute and learn faster. Fay file a site, Fay turn 46, file 0 Fay. This is the third mechanism. I call it leverage spending. Leverage spending is money used not to soothe desire but to increase the speed, quality, or frequency of attempts that can produce future income. That is the only spending I respect in the first 100,000 phase. A software tool that saves hours, a mentor or tutor who removes months of confusion, ad budget used as actual test capital, basic production equipment that converts your skill into an offer. Those things are not expenses in the ordinary emotional sense. They are gear, and gear matters in a climb. But you must understand the difference between gear and costume. Gear makes the climb more effective. Costume makes you feel like a climber. A better laptop for work can be gear. A luxury setup bought to feel serious can be costume. A real sales CRM can be gear. 12 unused subscriptions can be costume. One-on-one help that shortens the path can be gear. Infinite community hopping to feel in motion can be costume. That difference will save you. Now let me move to the center of the whole strategy, active income. This is where most of the internet lies to people. They show the end state and hide the bridge. They glorify passive income before the audience has ever learned how active income gets built. They make people feel defective for still trading time. When in reality almost every self-made fortune begins with monstrous active income. Someone sold, someone closed, someone built, someone fulfilled. Someone managed, someone owned a service machine or a product machine or a skills machine or a labor machine before he ever owned the right to speak lazily about passive income. The source is right to emphasize this. Passive income is downstream. Monster active income comes first. Fay file a site, Fay turn 46, file 0 Fay, that is the fourth mechanism. I call it the active income engine. The active income engine is the period in wealth building when your skill, time, and effort are deliberately converted into unusually strong earnings, so you can build capital fast enough to create later options. This stage is not glamorous, it is demanding, and it is the bridge almost everyone wants to skip. They want freedom without engine building. That is fantasy. If you want the first 100,000, you are almost certainly going to build it through active income first. A service, a skill, a sales role, a high-output operational function, a business that is still small enough to depend on your hands. That is normal. That is how the first war chest gets built. And once the war chest appears, now the game changes. Not because you are finished, because you are finally dangerous. That is what 100,000 represents. Danger not to the world, to dependency, to drift, to the need to say yes to bad deals, to the need to panic over every invoice, to the need to make weak decisions because you cannot afford strong ones yet. Now we come to the last stage, and it may be the most important. Do not increase your lifestyle. This is where the crowd fails. This is where so many strong earners die financially while still looking successful. The source says this plainly: it is not enough to increase income. You must refuse to let lifestyle eat the increase before the bank account reaches its checkpoint. That is exactly right. I have known many people who could earn at a level far above ordinary workers and still remain structurally weak because every improvement in income was immediately metabolized into rent, cars, restaurants, trips, identity purchases, and symbolic adulthood. The machine kept making more. The lifestyle kept consuming more. Nothing durable accumulated. Fay Falicite Fay Turn 46 File 0 Fay. I call this the recapture trap. The recapture trap is when life expands fast enough to absorb all new income, preventing the operator from ever banking enough cash to escape fragility. It is one of the most heartbreaking traps in finance because the person caught inside it often looks successful to outsiders. Nice apartment, good clothes, nicer car, better dinners, visible momentum, invisible weakness, and when trouble comes, the disguise gets torn off. This is why I respect the source's insistence that the early builder keep living small even after the first real money shows up. That is not deprivation. That is acceleration. The person who keeps the old rent while income jumps is not behind. He is compressing time. He is turning temporary earnings into permanent optionality. That is much more intelligent than upgrading your life to prove to casual observers that the thing is working. The fifth rule is this: the first 100,000 does not belong to the person who earns it. It belongs to the person who can keep it long enough to bank it. That is a brutal distinction, but it is true. Now let me pull the whole operating system together, because it is cleaner than most people realize. Stage 1 is compression. Crush the burn rate. Stage 2 is reclamation. Take back time. Stage 3 is selection. Choose a skill or service tied to current demand. Stage 4 is transformation. Turn consumption into repetitions and repetitions into behavior change. Stage 5 is leverage. Spend on tools, help, and attempts that increase execution. Stage 6 is intensity. Push active income higher. Stage 7 is containment. Refuse lifestyle expansion until the runway is real. That is the path, not inspirational in the soft sense. Useful, that is better. And this is the identity shift hidden inside the whole thing. Most people want to feel richer. I want you to become harder to kill financially. That is the flip. From consumer to operator, from spender to accumulator, from dreamer to builder, from person with ambition to person with runway. A consumer sees extra money and asks what life can now buy. An operator sees extra money and asks what freedom it can secure. A consumer wants relief right now. An operator wants distance from dependency later. A consumer celebrates visible upgrades. An operator celebrates invisible optionality. That is a completely different value system, and it is the one that produces the first 100,000, because the first 100,000 is not produced by one tactic. It is produced by one worldview, a worldview that says I would rather be hard to break than easy to admire. That is wealth, or at least it is the first serious layer of it. Now let me end where the source began emotionally, because I think that emotional truth is what gives the whole piece its force. The first 100,000 is not important because it makes you impressive. It is important because it lets you stop thinking like a hunted animal. Once you reach that point, the next year looks different, the next decision looks different, the next opportunity looks different, the next setback looks different. You can hold longer, learn longer, build longer, test longer, say no longer, think farther. The whole horizon moves. That is why I would never mock the first 100,000 as small. For many people, it is the first time the future opens at all. And if I wanted to make my first 100,000 in 2026, I would not start with motivation. I would start with compression. I would take my lifestyle to the floor. I would take my time back from drift. I would pick one thing people already buy. I would do repetitions until behavior changed. I would spend only on leverage. I would push active income hard. And when the extra money came, I would refuse to let life recapture it, because the goal is not to feel richer for a weekend. The goal is to cross a checkpoint. And once you cross it, you are finally in position to build the bigger life you keep talking about. That is what 100,000 really is, not wealth permission to begin.